The air in the Grand Astoria ballroom glittered, not just from the crystal chandeliers, but with the palpable energy of ambition. This was the night of the annual Innovators Gala, and for Kieran Lawrence, it was supposed to be a coronation. On his arm was Jessica Monroe, a woman as polished and expensive as the champagne flute in her hand. He was on the verge of landing the biggest deal of his career, a king surveying his court. But then the low hum of conversation in the ballroom didn't just quiet, it vanished. A silence so profound fell that the clink of a fork on a distant plate sounded like a gunshot. Every head, every single pair of eyes turned as one toward the grand entrance. And in that moment, Kieran Lawrence's perfectly constructed world began to shatter. Because the woman who had just walked in, the woman who looked less like a person and more like a celestial event, was the ex-wife he had discarded for being too plain. Kieran Lawrence felt the familiar, intoxicating thrum of power coursing through his veins. It was a sensation he lived for, a drug more potent than any substance. The Grand Astoria Ballroom was his arena tonight, and he was its prime gladiator. The Innovators Gala was the most exclusive event in the tech and finance calendar, a veritable sea of sharks where only the strongest survived. And tonight, Kieran felt like the apex predator. "Darling, you're practically glowing," Jessica Monroe murmured, her voice a low purr as she tightened her grip on his arm. Her fingers, tipped with blood-red nails, dug possessively into the sleeve of his custom Tom Ford tuxedo. Kieran glanced down at her. Jessica was, by all accounts, the perfect accessory. Her gown was a shimmering column of silver sequins that clung to her surgically perfected curves. Her blonde hair was styled in a severe, impossibly sleek bob, and her smile was a carefully calibrated weapon she deployed with precision. She was a statement piece, a living, breathing testament to his success. She was everything his ex-wife, Tiffany, had not been. "It's the scent of victory, my dear," Kieran replied, a smirk playing on his lips. He scanned the room, his eyes sharp and calculating. He spotted his target near the towering ice sculpture of a soaring eagle. Mr. Donovan, the formidable CEO of Aerodyne Global. Donovan was the gatekeeper to the Genesis project, a multi-billion-dollar contract that would catapult Kieran from a senior vice president to a legend in the industry. "Don't look so tense, Kieran. You have this in the bag," Jessica said, mistaking his predatory focus for anxiety. She adjusted the diamond necklace he'd bought her last month, a bauble that had cost more than Tiffany's car. "That old fossil Donovan would be a fool not to partner with you." Kieran's smirk tightened. "Donovan is no fool. That's why this has to be perfect." Perfection was Kieran's mantra. He had meticulously crafted his life, excising anything that didn't fit his vision of success. That included Tiffany, sweet, dependable, comfortable Tiffany. The thought of her now brought a faint, almost pitying smile to his face. He pictured her as he'd last seen her, in their shared, now his, suburban home, wearing one of her shapeless cardigans, her light brown hair pulled back in a messy bun, her face scrubbed clean of makeup. She'd been crying, of course, her eyes red-rimmed as he explained, with clinical detachment, that they had simply grown apart. It was the truth in a way. He had grown, and she had remained stagnant. While he was closing multi-million-dollar deals and networking with titans of industry, she was, what? Potting plants? Trying new soup recipes? Her world was small, domestic, and utterly devoid of the glamour and ambition that fueled him. She was the comfortable sweater you wore at home, not the tailored suit you wore to conquer the world. He needed a partner who reflected his status, who could stand beside him in rooms like this and shine. Tiffany would have shrunk into the wallpaper. "Look, there's Robert from the board," Kieran said, smoothly steering Jessica towards a portly man with a booming laugh. The next hour was a masterclass in corporate schmoozing. Kieran was a chameleon, effortlessly shifting from charming to deferential, from witty to intensely serious. He moved through the crowd with the fluid grace of a dancer. Jessica, a beautiful, silent echo at his side. He was in his element. Finally, he saw his opening. Mr. Donovan was momentarily alone, studying a piece of modern art on the wall. "Jessica, wait here," Kieran commanded softly. "Get us some more champagne." He didn't wait for a reply, already striding towards his prize. "Mr. Donovan," Kieran began, his voice a perfect blend of respect and confidence. "A pleasure to see you, sir. That's a stunning piece, isn't it? A commentary on the fragility of market dynamics, I believe." Donovan, a man with eyes that seemed to see right through you, turned slowly. "Lawrence, I thought it was just a mess of welded metal, but I appreciate the interpretation." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I've been reviewing your proposal for the Genesis project. It's aggressive." "Innovation requires aggression, sir," Kieran countered smoothly. "Aerodyne Global has always been at the forefront because it doesn't shy away from bold moves." "Bold moves can also lead to spectacular failures," Donovan said, his gaze unwavering. "This project requires more than just aggression. It requires stability, vision, and a partner who understands the nuance of long-term commitment. It's a marriage, Lawrence, not a one-night stand." The analogy pricked at something in Kieran's subconscious, a fleeting image of Tiffany's tear-streaked face. He pushed it away. "I assure you, sir, my commitment is absolute. My entire team is dedicated to making this a historic success." Donovan nodded slowly, still assessing him. "We'll see. The board meets next week. Your presentation was compelling, but I'm a man who believes character is just as important as a business plan. A man's personal life often reflects his professional integrity." A cold knot began to form in Kieran's stomach, but his face remained a mask of calm assurance. "I couldn't agree more, sir." It was at that precise moment that the change happened. It wasn't a loud noise. It was the opposite. It was a sudden, creeping vacuum of sound. The lively chatter, the clinking of glasses, the soft strains of the string quartet, it all faded away, replaced by an electric, head-swiveling silence. Kieran, annoyed by the interruption, followed Mr. Donovan's gaze and the gazes of everyone else towards the grand, arched entrance of the ballroom. A wave of whispers began to ripple through the crowd, starting as a murmur and growing into a torrent of hushed, incredulous questions. "Who is that? Is she a celebrity? A model? My God, look at that dress." Framed in the doorway, bathed in the warm glow of the entrance hall lights, stood a woman. But woman felt like an inadequate word. She was a vision, a long-limbed, graceful figure in a gown of the deepest emerald green silk, a color that seemed to drink the light and radiate it back with an inner fire. The dress was a masterpiece of understated elegance, cut with devastating simplicity, flowing over her form like liquid jade. A single, exquisite diamond necklace rested against her collarbone, catching the light with every subtle movement. Her hair, the same light brown Kieran remembered as dull and lifeless, was now a cascade of rich, honey-toned waves that fell over one shoulder. But it was her face that caused the air to leave Kieran's lungs. It was a face he knew better than his own, yet one he had never truly seen before. The soft, familiar features were sharpened, defined. Her cheekbones, which he'd never noticed, were now sculpted and high. Her lips, which he remembered as perpetually unadorned, were painted a sophisticated nude shade. And her eyes were the same warm hazel, but they were no longer gentle or accommodating. They were intelligent, confident, and held a cool, unreadable depth. His mind short-circuited. He saw the face but couldn't process the image. The cardigan was gone, replaced by couture. The messy bun was gone, replaced by a supermodel's mane. The apologetic slump of her shoulders was gone, replaced by a posture so poised and regal it commanded the attention of 200 of the city's most powerful people. Mr. Donovan let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be. Now that is an entrance." And as the woman took her first step into the ballroom, her expression serene and utterly self-possessed, Kieran Lawrence finally managed to connect the impossible vision with the ghost from his past. The woman who had silenced the entire room was Tiffany, his plain, boring, invisible ex-wife. For a long, suspended moment, Kieran's world tilted on its axis. It was as if the laws of physics had been temporarily suspended inside the Grand Astoria ballroom. The woman gliding into the room wore Tiffany's face, but she was an imposter, a changeling. The Tiffany he knew would rather die than be the center of attention. The Tiffany he knew wore beige and gray, colors designed to fade into the background. She spoke in soft, hesitant tones, and her most radical act was trying a new brand of tea. This woman, this creature of light and shadow and emerald silk, moved with a liquid confidence that seemed to ripple outwards, capturing everyone in its wake. She wasn't just in the room, she was owning it. Jessica reappeared at his side, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. She followed his stunned gaze. "Who in the hell is that?" she hissed, her voice sharp with an instant, territorial jealousy. "Some actress trying to make a splash?" Kieran couldn't form words. His mouth was dry, his heart hammering against his ribs in a frantic, panicked rhythm. He felt Mr. Donovan's eyes on him, a curious, analytical glint in them. "Lawrence, you look like you've seen a ghost," Donovan remarked, his voice laced with amusement. I know her," Kieran finally managed to stammer out, the words feeling foreign and clumsy on his tongue. Jessica's head whipped around to stare at him, her perfectly arched eyebrows shooting up towards her hairline. "You know her? How?" Before he could answer, another figure emerged from the entryway to join Tiffany's side. It was Leo Beaumont. The Leo Beaumont. The legendary art collector and philanthropist, a man whose quiet influence dwarfed the loud ambitions of nearly everyone in the room. Beaumont was notoriously private, his appearances at such events rarer than a solar eclipse. He was dressed in a classic black tuxedo that somehow made everyone else's look like a rental. He moved to Tiffany's side with an easy familiarity, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back as he leaned in to say something in her ear. She laughed, a sound that was clear and bright, and it carried across the silent room like music. The sight of Leo Beaumont's hand on Tiffany's back was like a physical blow to Kieran. It wasn't just that she was here, looking like this. She was with him, a man of a completely different caliber, a man who operated in a world of culture and old money, a world Kieran desperately wanted to penetrate, but could only observe from the outside. "That's Tiffany," Kieran said, the name feeling like ash in his mouth. Jessica's perfectly made-up face contorted in disbelief. "Tiffany? Your mousy little ex-wife Tiffany? You have got to be kidding me." She let out a short, sharp laugh, but it was brittle with insecurity. "What did she do? Win the lottery? Hire a fairy godmother?" The whispers around them were growing louder now, fueled by the dual shock of Tiffany's transformation and Leo Beaumont's presence. "Is that Leo Beaumont? I haven't seen him out in years. And who is the woman with him? She's breathtaking. Wait, isn't that Kieran Lawrence's ex? No way, Tiff Miller? She was so plain." The word plain echoed in Kieran's ears, a word he himself had used countless times to describe her, both to others and to himself. It had been his justification, his mantra. "I need more. She's too plain for my life." Now the word sounded absurd, a lie exposed under the brilliant glare of the chandeliers. Tiffany and Leo began to move through the room, not with the frantic energy of networkers, but with the calm purpose of royalty holding court. People parted for them. Men who just an hour ago were slapping Kieran on the back now stared, mesmerized at his ex-wife. Women, including Jessica, were dissecting her with a mixture of awe and envy. Her dress, her hair, her poise, it was all flawless. Kieran felt a primal, possessive rage building in his chest. This was his night. This was his arena. She had no right to be here. She had no right to steal his spotlight, to make him look like a fool. He had discarded her. She was supposed to fade away, to become a sad, forgotten chapter in his triumphant biography. She wasn't supposed to rewrite the entire book. "I'm going to go say hello," Kieran said, his voice tight. "What?" "Kieran, no!" Jessica snapped, grabbing his arm again. "Don't give her the satisfaction. Look at her. She's obviously doing this for attention. It's pathetic." But Kieran wasn't listening. He was watching as Mr. Donovan, the man who held his future in his hands, excused himself and began walking directly towards Tiffany and Leo Beaumont. Kieran's blood ran cold. He watched, frozen, as Donovan reached the pair and greeted Leo with a warm handshake and a genuine smile. Then Donovan turned to Tiffany, his expression one of pure admiration. Kieran couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could see the animation in their conversation. He saw Tiffany's smile, a genuine, radiant smile that lit up her entire face. It wasn't the meek, apologetic smile she used to give him. This was the smile of an equal. The knot in his stomach tightened into a vice. The Genesis project, his promotion, his carefully constructed image. It was all becoming background noise to the spectacle of Tiffany's resurrection. He felt the control he cherished so much slipping through his fingers like fine sand. "This is a joke," he muttered to himself. He started moving, pulling his arm free from Jessica's grasp. He was operating on pure, unthinking instinct. He needed to reassert his dominance, to put her back in her box, to remind her and everyone else who she was. She was Tiff Miller, his cast-off wife. Jessica hurried after him, her heels clicking angrily on the marble floor. "Kieran, what are you doing? You're going to make a scene." He ignored her. His focus was narrowed, a predator zeroing in on its prey. But as he got closer, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. Tiffany wasn't looking at him. She wasn't scanning the crowd for his reaction. In fact, she seemed utterly oblivious to his existence. Her entire attention was on her conversation with Mr. Donovan and Leo Beaumont. She was gesturing gracefully with one hand as she made a point, her expression intelligent and engaged. She wasn't doing this for him. The realization was more shocking than her physical transformation. This entire spectacular display wasn't some petty revenge ploy aimed at him. It was something else entirely. She had her own purpose here, a purpose that had absolutely nothing to do with Kieran Lawrence. He was irrelevant to her. And in that moment, in the middle of his coronation gala, Kieran had never felt so small. The king was suddenly a commoner in the presence of a queen, and his carefully built castle was starting to feel like it was made of glass. 18 months earlier, Tiffany Miller had been sitting on the floor of a half-empty closet, surrounded by the ghosts of a life that was no longer hers. The air smelled of Kieran's expensive cologne and the cedar blocks he insisted on using. She was holding one of his old university sweatshirts, a soft, faded gray garment she had loved to wear on lazy Sunday mornings. The fabric was damp with her tears. He said we've grown apart," she whispered into the phone, her voice choked and raw. On the other end of the line was Sophie Chen, her best friend since their art school days, the one person who had seen the vibrant, creative soul Tiffany kept hidden away. "He said what?" Sophie's voice was sharp, a staccato burst of indignation that cut through Tiffany's fog of grief. "That's the most pathetic, cowardly cliché in the book. What he means is, he's become an arrogant jerk, and he wants a new trophy for his shelf. But I did everything for him, Soph," Tiffany sobbed, clutching the sweatshirt tighter. "I gave up the gallery internship in New York so he could take the job here. I managed the house, his schedule, his family obligations. I built this whole world around him so he could focus on his career. I thought that's what love was." "No, Tiff, that's what being an unpaid assistant is," Sophie countered, her tone softening slightly. "Listen to me. You are not just Kieran Lawrence's wife. You were Tiffany Miller first, the artist, the one who could find beauty in a rust stain on the sidewalk, the one who had more talent in her little finger than that entire corporate boardroom has combined. Where did that woman go?" Tiffany didn't have an answer. She looked around the meticulously organized beige and gray house that Kieran had designed. It was tasteful, expensive, and completely devoid of personality. It was a house built for entertaining, for impressing, not for living. Just like her marriage, she had slowly, imperceptibly erased herself to make more room for him. She wore neutral colors because he said bright ones were distracting. She kept her hair in a simple bun because he found elaborate styles fussy. She'd stopped painting because the smell of turpentine gave him a headache. The divorce papers arrived a week later. Kieran was generous, if you could call it that. He wanted a clean, quick break. She got the house, which she didn't want, a sizable alimony settlement, and her freedom. But the freedom felt like a terrifying, gaping void. For 10 years, her entire identity had been wrapped up in him. Without him, who was she? The first month was a blur of ice cream, sad movies, and endless, sleepless nights. Then one rainy afternoon, Sophie showed up at her door, 2 large suitcases in hand. "Get up," Sophie said not unkindly. You're coming to stay with me, and you're not allowed to wear anything gray for the foreseeable future. The pity party is officially over. Sophie's apartment was the complete opposite of Tiffany's house. It was a chaotic, vibrant loft in the arts district, filled with bold colors, half-finished canvases, and the constant thrum of creative energy. Sophie was a rising star in the fashion world, a stylist known for her fearless and intuitive eye. The first few weeks were hard. Sophie didn't coddle her. She dragged Tiffany out of bed every morning for a run along the river. She threw out all of Tiffany's shapeless cardigans and replaced them with clothes that had structure and color. She signed Tiffany up for a life drawing class at the local arts college. I can't, Tiffany had protested, staring at the blank easel. I haven't held a piece of charcoal in years. It's like riding a bike, Sophie had insisted. A very messy, very frustrating bike. Now draw. And slowly, painstakingly, Tiffany began to draw. Then she began to paint. The first few pieces were stiff and academic. But then something broke loose inside her. All the pain, the humiliation, the quiet rage of being discarded, it all came pouring out onto the canvas. Her art was no longer just about finding beauty in rust stains. It was about the raw, complex, and often brutal beauty of human emotion. Her style was bold, abstract, and utterly unique. The physical transformation followed the artistic one. The morning runs became a cherished ritual. She started working with a trainer, not to become skinny, but to become strong. For the first time, she felt a powerful connection to her own body, a sense of ownership she hadn't realized was missing. She learned what foods fueled her and which ones dragged her down. Sophie, meanwhile, took on Tiffany's wardrobe as her personal passion project. Style isn't about following trends, Tiff, she would say, holding up a vintage silk blouse. It's about telling the world who you are without having to say a word. For 10 years, your clothes have been whispering, "Don't mind me." It's time for them to start screaming, "Here I am." Tiffany discovered she loved the feel of silk against her skin, the power of a well-tailored jacket, the drama of a bold color. She let her hair grow long and learned how to style it in soft waves that framed her face. A face that was changing not just from weight loss, but from a newfound confidence that emanated from within. She started smiling more, laughing more. She was becoming herself again. Or perhaps, for the very first time. The turning point came 6 months ago. Sophie had dragged her to a gallery opening, a chic, exclusive event. Tiffany, nervous but feeling radiant in a cobalt blue dress, found herself standing in front of a massive, chaotic painting. "It's technically brilliant, but it has no soul," a deep, melodic voice said from beside her. She turned to see an impeccably dressed man with kind, intelligent eyes. It was Leo Beaumont. Tiffany, who had studied his collection in art history books, was momentarily starstruck. But then her own passion took over. "I disagree," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I think the artist is terrified of revealing his soul, so he's hiding behind his technique. The chaos is a shield." Leo Beaumont had turned to her, a look of genuine surprise and intrigue on his face. "You see that too?" They talked for 2 hours that night, about art, about passion, about the difference between something that is merely beautiful and something that is true. He asked to see her work. The next week, he visited her small studio, set up in a corner of Sophie's loft. He spent a full hour in silence, just looking at her canvases. Finally, he turned to her, his expression serious. "This is extraordinary, Tiffany. It's raw. It's powerful. It's honest. This is the kind of work the world needs to see." That was the beginning of their partnership. Leo didn't just become her patron, he became her mentor and her friend. He saw the artist in her, the visionary, and he gave her the platform she needed. He commissioned a series of works from her for his new foundation, the Beaumont Foundation for a New Renaissance, an ambitious project aimed at fusing art and technology. When the invitation for the Innovators Gala arrived, addressed to both of them, Tiffany's first instinct was to refuse. It was Kieran's world. The thought of seeing him made her stomach clench. "You have to go," Leo had told her, his gaze steady. "But not for him. You are not the ghost of his past, Tiffany. You are the face of my foundation's future. We are announcing our new Art Tech Incubator project that night. You are its creative director. This isn't his gala. It's your debut." Sophie had of course been ecstatic. The dress, the emerald green silk, was her masterpiece. "This isn't a revenge dress, Tiff," she'd said during the final fitting. "This is an arrival dress." And so, as Tiffany stood in the foyer of the Grand Astoria ballroom, taking a deep, calming breath, she wasn't thinking about Kieran. She was thinking about the young woman who had cried on a closet floor, and she was thinking about the incredible, painful, beautiful journey that had led her to this door. She felt Leo's hand on her back, a silent, supportive presence. "Ready?" he asked softly. She looked at him and smiled, a real, genuine smile. "Ready." She walked through the door, not as Tiffany Lawrence, the discarded wife, but as Tiffany Miller, the artist, and she was finally, completely, gloriously home. The moment Tiffany stepped fully into the ballroom, the silence broke, and a tidal wave of whispers crashed over the crowd. She felt hundreds of eyes on her, a sensation that would have once sent her fleeing in a panic. Tonight, it felt different. It felt like a spotlight, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel the urge to shy away from it. She kept her chin high, her shoulders back, and focused on the calm, reassuring presence of Leo Beaumont beside her. "It seems we've made an impression," Leo murmured, his lips close to her ear, a hint of amusement in his voice. "You're the recluse. I'm just your arm candy," she quipped back, her nerves steadying with their easy banter. "My dear Tiffany," he chuckled softly, "if you're the arm candy, I shudder to think what that makes the rest of us. Mere mortals, I suspect." Their path through the room was slow, not because they were walking slowly, but because people kept stopping them. Old acquaintances of Leo's, powerful figures in finance and tech, approached with wide, curious eyes, their gazes shifting from the legendary collector to the stunning woman at his side. Leo introduced her simply and with profound respect. "This is Tiffany Miller, a brilliant artist and the creative director of our new incubator project." He never mentioned her past, her connection to Kieran. In this room, in his world, she was defined not by who she had been married to, but by who she was and what she was about to achieve. With every introduction, every handshake, Tiffany felt another layer of the old invisible wife sloughing off. Across the room, Kieran watched this procession with a toxic cocktail of fury, bewilderment, and a strange, unfamiliar pang he couldn't quite name. It felt like loss. Not the loss of Tiffany, the quiet woman he had left behind, but the loss of this magnificent creature he had somehow never seen. "Kieran, stop staring! People are noticing!" Jessica hissed, her grip on his arm now painfully tight. Her face was a mask of strained pleasantry, but her eyes were flinty with rage. "This is humiliating. She planned this. She's trying to ruin your night." "It's working," Kieran said through gritted teeth. His focus was locked on the sight of Mr. Donovan, who was still deep in conversation with Tiffany and Leo. Donovan was laughing, a full-bellied, genuine laugh that Kieran had never managed to elicit from him. He was captivated by Tiffany. Kieran felt a desperate, clawing need to reclaim the narrative. He couldn't let her just waltz in and hijack his triumph. He had to confront her, to show everyone that he was still in control, that she was still just his ex-wife playing dress-up. He started moving again, this time with a grim determination. Jessica trailed behind him like an angry shadow. As they approached, the small group around Tiffany and Leo fell silent, sensing the impending collision. Mr. Donovan turned, his jovial expression fading as he saw Kieran's thunderous face. "Lawrence," he said, his tone now cool and formal. Kieran ignored him. His eyes were fixed on Tiffany. He took in the details up close. The subtle shimmer of gold in her eye makeup. The delicate strength in the line of her jaw. The way the emerald dress made her hazel eyes flash with green fire. She was even more stunning up close. "Tiffany," he said, his voice coming out harsher than he intended. "What a surprise to see you here." Tiffany met his gaze without flinching. Her expression was perfectly neutral, polite but distant. It was the look you would give a stranger who had mistaken you for someone else. Kieran, she said, her voice calm and even. It didn't hold a trace of the warmth or the pain he remembered. It's a small world. Small world? This isn't exactly your usual scene, he said, gesturing vaguely at the opulent ballroom. The implication was clear. You don't belong here. A flicker of something, amusement, danced in her eyes before she extinguished it. My scenes have changed, she replied simply. Jessica, unable to remain silent any longer, stepped forward, forcing a saccharine smile. Tiff! Oh my goodness, I barely recognized you. You look so different. That dress is just wonderful. Did you rent it for tonight? The jab was as subtle as a sledgehammer. It was designed to remind Tiffany of her place, to imply that this glamour was a temporary, borrowed costume. Tiffany's gaze shifted to Jessica. She looked her up and down slowly, not with malice, but with the detached, analytical eye of an artist studying a subject. Finally, she offered a small, serene smile. Jessica, thank you. Sophie Chen sourced the fabric and designed it for me. It's a custom piece. I'm so glad you like it. The mention of Sophie Chen, a name revered in fashion circles, landed with a quiet thud. Jessica's smile faltered. She knew exactly who Sophie Chen was, and she knew a custom gown by her was something money alone couldn't always buy. It required taste, connections, status. Leo Beaumont, who had been observing the exchange with a quiet intensity, finally stepped in. He placed a protective hand on Tiffany's arm. Kieran, he said, his voice smooth as velvet but with an undercurrent of steel. It's good to see you. I don't believe you've met my partner in our new venture. He looked down at Tiffany with obvious pride. Though it seems you two have a passing acquaintance. Passing acquaintance. The phrase was a deliberate, surgical strike. It relegated 10 years of marriage to a footnote. Kieran felt his face flush with heat. Partner? He scoffed, unable to help himself. What kind of partner? Before Tiffany could answer, Mr. Donovan spoke up, his voice booming with newfound enthusiasm. A brilliant one, Lawrence. Ms. Miller and Mr. Beaumont are about to revolutionize the tech art space. Their new incubator, it's visionary. We were just discussing the potential for cross-platform synergy. In fact, he added, turning his full attention to Tiffany, it's a far more interesting application of emergent tech than your Genesis project's focus on logistics algorithms. The words hit Kieran like a punch to the gut. More interesting than Genesis. He looked at Mr. Donovan's rapt face, then at Leo's cool, confident demeanor, and finally at Tiffany. She stood there, poised and unshakable, the calm eye of the hurricane that was systematically destroying his entire evening. She hadn't come here to ruin his night. She had come here for her own, and in doing so, had rendered his completely irrelevant. The beautiful woman, the prestigious partner, the admiration of the man he needed to impress. She had it all, and she had done it all without him. Jessica, sensing the complete loss of control, made a final desperate play. Well, it's just so wonderful that you've been able to move on, Tiff, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. After Kieran, I imagine it must have been so difficult for you to get back out there. We're so happy for you. She linked her arm through Kieran's, a gesture of ownership. Tiffany looked at the linked arms. For the first time, a genuine emotion crossed her face, a flicker of something that looked almost like pity. Difficult? She repeated softly, her voice carrying in the tense silence. No, Jessica. Leaving Kieran wasn't difficult. It was like taking off a pair of shoes that were a size too small. For years, I thought the problem was my feet. It's a relief to finally realize the shoes were just poorly made. A collective, sharp intake of breath came from the people standing nearby, who had been shamelessly eavesdropping. The insult was so elegant, so precise, that it left no room for a response. It didn't just dismiss Kieran, it deconstructed him, piece by piece, and found him wanting. Kieran stood there speechless as his ex-wife, the plain, boring woman he had deemed unworthy, turned her back on him and walked away. Not in defeat, but in triumph, with Leo Beaumont and Mr. Donovan flanking her like a royal guard. The king had been publicly dethroned in his own court. The conversation for Kieran was over, but for the rest of the gala, It was the only thing anyone was talking about. Tiffany's perfectly delivered lines spread through the ballroom like wildfire, repeated in hushed, delighted tones from one glittering group to another. The shoes were just poorly made. Can you imagine? He looks absolutely gutted. Serves him right. I heard he was brutal to her during the divorce. And she's with Leo Beaumont. That's the ultimate upgrade. Kieran stood frozen in place, the blood pounding in his ears. Jessica was tugging at his sleeve, her voice a furious, panicked whisper. Kieran, do something. Everyone is looking at us. They're laughing at you. At us. He finally snapped out of his trance, but it was too late. The damage was done. He glanced around the room and saw not admiration or envy, but pity and schadenfreude. He had built his identity on being the man everyone wanted to be, and in the span of 10 minutes, Tiffany had turned him into a punchline. He saw her across the room, standing with a small, captivated circle that included not only Mr. Donovan, but also two major board members from Aerodyne Global. She was talking, and they were listening, hanging on her every word. There was a passion in her expression, an intellectual fire he had never seen before. She wasn't just a pretty face in a beautiful dress. She was a woman of substance, a leader. This is your fault, Jessica snarled, finally dropping all pretense of composure. You told me she was a nobody, a sad little homemaker who wouldn't know couture from a paper bag. You made me look like an idiot. Me? Kieran rounded on her, his own frustration boiling over. You're the one who had to make that catty comment about her dress. You couldn't just leave it alone, could you? I was defending our honor, she shrieked, her voice rising in pitch and attracting more unwanted attention. She showed up here to humiliate you, and you just stood there and let her. Their ugly, whispered fight was a stark contrast to the scene of quiet triumph unfolding around Tiffany. For Kieran, the gala had transformed from his personal coronation into a public crucifixion. Every handshake felt limp, every smile seemed mocking. His carefully prepared talking points about the Genesis project now felt trivial and uninspired. All the power, all the energy in the room had been drawn to a new center of gravity, and that center was his ex-wife. He tried to salvage the situation, cornering a junior executive he knew by the bar. Quite a night, eh, Tom? He said, attempting a casual tone. Tom shifted uncomfortably. Yeah, Mr. Lawrence. Wild. Hey, is it true your ex-wife is running that new Beaumont incubator? I saw the press pre-release. It looks incredible. They're pioneering generative art AI. It's going to be huge. Kieran's smile froze on his face. Press pre-release? Yeah, it just dropped about an hour ago. My phone's been buzzing. It's the talk of the tech blogs. Beaumont and Miller announced partnership to redefine digital artistry. That's her, right? Tiffany Miller? The final pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't a spontaneous appearance. It was a perfectly executed launch. The gala was the venue, the most influential people in the industry were the audience. Her entrance, her poise, her conversation with Donovan, it was all part of a brilliant strategy. She hadn't stumbled into his world. She had targeted it with military precision to launch her own. He pulled out his own phone, his hands trembling slightly. He scrolled through his news alerts. There it was, a dozen headlines from major tech and art publications. There were photos of Tiffany, professional headshots he'd never seen before, where she looked strong, confident, and impossibly beautiful. There were quotes from Leo Beaumont praising her singular vision and unparalleled talent. And there were details about the project, a well-funded, ambitious venture that made his Genesis project seem like a child's school project. This was the true twist of the knife. It wasn't just that she looked better or had a powerful new man. It was that she was more successful. She had outmaneuvered him in his own field, playing a game he didn't even know she was in. The woman he had dismissed as having no ambition had just revealed an ambition that dwarfed his own. He looked for Jessica, but she was gone. He spotted her near the exit, talking animatedly on her phone, likely arranging her own escape from the sinking ship that was his evening. He was well and truly alone. His eyes found Tiffany one last time. She was standing near the French doors that led to the terrace, talking with Leo. The crowd around her had thinned, leaving them in a bubble of shared intimacy. He saw Leo gently touch her cheek, a gesture of profound affection and respect. And Tiffany, in response, leaned into his touch for a brief moment, her expression one of gratitude and genuine happiness. In that moment, Kieran Lawrence understood the full scope of his miscalculation. He hadn't just lost a wife he thought he'd outgrown. He had lost a partner he had never truly known. He had looked at a diamond in the rough and, seeing only the rough, had thrown it away. Now it was cut, polished, and set in a place of honor, and all he could do was watch it sparkle from a distance, blinded by the light. The gala wasn't the end of her story, it was the beginning. And it was, he was horrifyingly aware, the beginning of his own irrelevance. The rest of the evening passed in a humiliating blur for Kieran. The vibrant ballroom, once his kingdom, now felt like a hostile territory. The whispers followed him everywhere, a constant, sibilant reminder of his fall from grace. He tried to engage in conversation, to steer the topic back to the Genesis project, but no one was interested. The only topic was Tiffany Miller and Leo Beaumont. He saw Robert from the board, the man he had charmed earlier in the evening. He clapped Kieran on the shoulder, but his grip was pitying, not congratulatory. "Tough night, son," Robert said, his voice low. "Your ex-wife is something else, a real force of nature. Donovan is completely smitten with her project, says it has soul, which is more than he'll ever say about logistics software." Robert shook his head. "You let a good one get away, Kieran. A really good one." Every word was a fresh wound. He had prided himself on his judgment, his ability to assess value and potential. It was the foundation of his career. Yet he had made the single greatest misjudgment of his life, and he had done it in the most personal way imaginable. The final crushing blow came near the end of the night. He saw Mr. Donovan preparing to leave, and in a last-ditch effort to salvage something, intercepted him at the coat check. "Mr. Donovan, sir," Kieran began, trying to sound composed, "I hope tonight's distractions won't affect your consideration of the Genesis project." Donovan turned, his face unreadable. He took his coat from the attendant and draped it over his arm. "Distractions? No, Lawrence. What happened tonight was not a distraction. It was an education." He paused, looking Kieran directly in the eye. "I told you I believe a man's character is reflected in his personal life. For months you've been selling me on your vision, your foresight, your ability to identify and capitalize on future trends." He gave a short, dry laugh. "And it turns out you were living with the biggest future trend in the entire tech art world, and you didn't even see it. You dismissed it, threw it away." Donovan's voice dropped to a clinical, dispassionate tone. "Your proposal for the Genesis project is sound, on paper, but I'm no longer confident in the man behind it. We need a visionary, not just an opportunist. The board meeting is next week. I suggest you prepare for some very tough questions." He didn't need to say anything more. The message was crystal clear. The deal was dead. Kieran stood there motionless as Mr. Donovan walked away without a backward glance. He finally retrieved his own coat and walked out of the Grand Astoria. The cold night air was a shock after the stuffy ballroom. Jessica was nowhere to be seen. He checked his phone. A single text message from her. "I'm staying at my sister's. We need to talk." This was a disaster. He knew what "we need to talk" meant. Jessica was a creature of status. She had attached herself to him because he was a rising star. Tonight, his star hadn't just fallen, it had been completely extinguished by Tiffany's supernova. He was no longer a valuable asset. He drove home to the large empty house in the suburbs, the house Tiffany had once tried to make a home. It felt different now. The minimalist, beige and gray decor that he had once seen as sophisticated and modern now looked sterile, cold, and lonely. He walked through the silent rooms, his footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. He found himself in the spare bedroom she had used as a makeshift art studio after he'd complained about the smell in the main part of the house. He had rarely ever entered it. It was the only room he hadn't redecorated after she left. In the corner, covered by a dust sheet, was an old easel. He pulled the sheet off. Tacked to the easel was a piece of charcoal sketch paper. On it was a half-finished drawing. It was a portrait of him, but it wasn't the powerful, confident executive he saw in the mirror. It was a sketch of him sleeping, his face relaxed, vulnerable, the lines of ambition and arrogance temporarily smoothed away. It was an intimate, tender drawing, rendered with a skill he had never bothered to appreciate. She had seen a part of him that he himself had forgotten, a softer version of the man he had become. A wave of regret so profound it was physically painful washed over him. It wasn't just about the deal, the promotion, or his public humiliation. It was the crushing realization of what he had truly lost. He had traded authenticity for image, partnership for possession, and love for a trophy. He thought Tiffany was the one holding him back, but now he saw the truth. His own shallow, narrow vision had been his cage all along. He sank onto the small stool in the dusty room, the silent portrait of his former self staring back at him. He had won his freedom from a life he considered plain, only to find himself utterly alone in a gilded prison of his own making. The king was in exile, haunted by the ghost of the queen he had banished, a queen who had gone on to build a far grander kingdom without him. On the terrace overlooking the city lights, the noise of the gala faded to a distant murmur. Tiffany leaned against the cool stone balustrade, taking her first real deep breath of the evening. The emerald silk of her dress rustled softly in the breeze. "So," Leo said, coming to stand beside her, "how does it feel to conquer the world in a single night?" Tiffany turned to him, a small, genuine smile on her face. "It feels quiet. Not at all what I expected." "The loudest victories are often the quietest inside," he observed, his gaze warm and steady. "You weren't there for revenge, Tiffany. You were there to claim your space, and you did." She thought about the confrontation with Kieran. The hurt that had once been a constant, aching presence was gone. In its place was a strange, hollow sort of pity. She saw him not as the monster who had broken her heart, but as a small, insecure man, terrified of being seen as anything less than perfect. His cruelty had been a symptom of his own weakness. "He thought my world was too small for him," she mused, looking out at the sprawling, glittering city. He never realized he was the one living in a small world, a box made of money, status, and other people's opinions. "And you?" Leo asked gently. "What is your world made of?" Tiffany was silent for a moment, considering the question. "It's made of color," she said finally, "and texture, and truth, and the courage to paint things as they are, not just as we wish they were. It's made of friends who show up with suitcases and tell you the pity party's over." She smiled at him. "And it's made of mentors who see something in you that you'd forgotten was there." Leo's answering smile was soft. "The honor has been all mine, Tiffany. The world is about to see what I've had the privilege of seeing for months. You are a renaissance." A comfortable, promising silence settled between them. It wasn't a romantic silence, not yet, but it was filled with a deep, mutual respect and the thrilling potential of a shared future. Their partnership was just beginning, built on a foundation of creativity and vision. For the first time, Tiffany felt like she was part of a team where she was valued for her mind and her talent, not for how well she supported someone else's dream. This was her dream, too. Her phone buzzed in her small clutch. It was a text from Sophie. "Sophie, news is out. My phone is blowing up. Everyone wants to know who designed the dress. More importantly, everyone knows who Tiffany Miller is. You did it. So proud I could burst. Now get out of there and celebrate." Tiffany showed the message to Leo, her eyes shining. The night had been a success on every possible level. It was the launch of her career, the debut of her new self, and the final definitive closing of a painful chapter. "She's right," Leo said. "Our work here is done. Shall we?" He offered her his arm. As they walked back through the now thinning crowd, the few remaining guests watched them with open admiration. Tiffany walked with her head held high, no longer the ghost of Kieran Lawrence's past, but the architect of her own brilliant future. She wasn't a woman transformed by a makeover. She was a woman who had finally come home to herself. Her beauty wasn't in the dress or the diamonds, but in the unshakable confidence of a soul that had been tested by fire and emerged, not scarred, but forged into something stronger and more radiant than before. Her journey was far from over, but she was finally and irrevocably on her own path. So what is the real takeaway from Tiffany's story? It's not just about getting revenge on an ex or showing up to a party in a killer dress. It's a powerful reminder that the most profound transformations happen from the inside out. Tiffany's glow-up wasn't just about stylists and trainers. It was about rediscovering her passion, reclaiming her identity, and investing in her own talent after years of putting it aside for someone else. Her story proves that true power isn't about who you're with, but who you are. It's about realizing that your worth is not defined by anyone else's opinion, especially not the opinion of someone who was too blind to see your value in the first place. The best revenge isn't being seen with a new man. It's being seen, finally, as your own incredible, successful, and unbreakable self. If Tiffany's journey from heartbroken to history maker resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up. And don't forget to share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own power. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you won't miss our next story about triumph and transformation. Thank you for listening.